welcome once again to the Cine-Files. My name is Steve Morris. I'm a filmmaker and directing instructor in Los Angeles, California.
Hey everyone, my name is John Roque. I'm a writer, producer, and host here in California, CEO of the Outlaw Nation. Ready to talk about what we're going to talk about today, man.
Well, this is a weird time. And obviously, you noticed by looking at the title of this episode that we're not doing a movie right now.
Yeah.
Our intention this week was we were going to release Brief Encounter, which is one of my favorite romantic films and maybe not exactly one of John's favorites. And
I would say possibly not at the beginning, but maybe by the end. You guys will find out later on.
And we had a great discussion about it, but then looking at what was going on in the world, and we just suddenly went, you know what? Now's not the time. Now's not the time to, we love talking about movies on this podcast. We're going to get back to talking about the movies on this podcast, but there's a lot of very difficult stuff happening. And John and I both have very strong emotions about what's going on. And we just felt like we needed to talk about it. And here's kind of what happened is that we got a wonderful suggestion for a Cine-Files short. And that suggestion was to discuss art and politics. And is art inherently political? Do artists have a responsibility to talk about their time? How do we handle political issues within art? And John and I recorded this about a week and a half ago, and we had a great discussion. And then as what has happened in the last 5 or 6 days started to occur, I started to feel real uncomfortable because I just went, I don't think we can release this discussion that was recorded before all the protests and riots and before the president did what the president has done without having some explanation. So what we finally decided to do is we're going to, instead of releasing that short only to our Patreon members, we're going to release it right here. But before we get to it, I feel like we need to just take a moment to talk about what's going on right now. And because here's the thing, is that the question that we were asked was, do artists have a responsibility to talk about what's going on in the world?
Yeah.
And my main answer when we recorded that was, no, artists' first job is to entertain.
Yeah.
And that's not how I'm feeling right now. Right now, I'm feeling like we have a responsibility to talk about what's going on, that we have a platform, I have a microphone, and that I have a lot of emotions, and that we need to talk about this because it's only through talking about things that we can move past things or make things better.
I think that's when we were, when Steve reached out last night, we were kicking around the idea of doing the show dropping the episode or not dropping the episode. He mentioned the politics talk, and I know Steve had gone back and forth about it, whether we should release it or not, he almost killed it to do a little behind the scenes thing because he felt, it wasn't the right time to drop something like this, but I encouraged him to listen to it again. And I felt we had a great discussion, and Steve felt that way as well by the end after listening to it again. And so the caveat that Steve mentioned, the caveat that we would do a new intro for it. So that's why we're doing this, and to talk about everything that's happening and see what's going on, and also touch base with some of you all that might be like, well, I don't know if I feel like listening to a Cine-Files episode today. As much as some of you may want to escape, I think it's good to hear from us about how we feel about it. And maybe we can bring you some kind of peace or calm or feel a sense like, you're being heard, or that other people feel the same way that you do about it. Because I know for me, on Monday, I was okay when I woke up on Monday morning. I mean, the protests were insane. I wasn't in town. I was down in San Diego. And I don't mean the protests were insane. I mean, what happened afterwards, the protests, the rioting, the looting, the police getting involved and doing the things they were doing to agitate. Like, there was a lot of blame, I think, on both sides, depending on what city you were looking at. And so watching people march through cities and places that I have lived near, literally feet away from for a number of years, and then eventually march through Beverly Hills itself, I was incredibly surprised by that, and then incredibly surprised by the devastation and the anger. The looting really pissed me off. The attack, the instigation by the police, the shooting of rubber bullets, the swinging of batons, the pushing down of people, the using of shields, all of that just really infuriated me because it was like watching two people fight who you're like, there's no need to do this on either side. This was a peaceful protest. Let it be peaceful. and let's move on. And then you heard about outside agitators, and you saw, videos or images of white people dressed in all black who were going in there and, purposely instigating the police or tagging businesses with their spray paint. I saw that at the Starbucks that we go to a lot over there at the Grove, seeing two young women tagging it. And when they were confronted by black women, they turned around and tried to put their hands up to tell them to calm down, because they were telling them to stop tagging this stuff, because it was the black protesters who were being hurt and beat up by the police because they're not going to go after white kids. And so all of that, and to see them like try to calm them down and try to be like, no, don't tell us, we're fighting for you. And it's like, no, you're not. You're causing problems. And that frustrated me too, because that's privileged white shit in a different format. So all of it just kind of frustrated me on so many levels, because I think all of this could have been avoided with just letting the protests happen and then dispersing the crowd at the end and saying, okay, the protest is over. You guys have to go home. And that's that. The looters who came in and took stuff from people who have businesses that are barely making it after the COVID situation, I have no sympathy for them. Now, I don't advocate shooting them and all that. Sadly, I saw a friend of mine advocate that on Twitter that caused a real big battle, and I don't advocate that. But I certainly feel like these looters and and some of the rioters were obscuring the cause of what was the point of the protests, which was to protest the murder of George Floyd and the murder of those Ahmaud Arbery and the young lady Breonna Taylor, I think her name was, all of those murders. And so I thought you give ammunition to the other side by doing stuff like that to completely distort the protests for their own political benefit, and that frustrated me.
Well, you gave a very measured and balanced discussion of this. Yeah. And I want to tell you how I'm feeling, because normally that's how I want to talk. I mean, like, I feel like, those who listen to the show, like, I don't generally feel that attacking the other side is useful as a level of discourse.
Yes.
I don't generally feel that disparaging people helps bring them to your side.
Right.
And I've spent, I would say, the last 15, 20 years of really, really trying to reach out to people that don't agree with me, mm-hmm. to have intelligent discussions with them, yep. to respect that people come from a different place with a different experience, with a different philosophy and different yep. priorities. And I even, like, when we first started this podcast, I had a blog called A Civil Voice, which I haven't really added to in a few years, but that was its whole point, was to have a civil discussion about things so that we can resolve these really complicated issues as a society. And I feel, and this is what I feel happened to me in the last 4 days, that I feel like I spent the last 20 years wasting my time.
Yeah.
That I didn't get anywhere.
Huh.
And even though my philosophy is still, we have to talk to each other, we have to learn to be reasonable, we have to accept that the other side has a point and real feelings and represents values, and that we shouldn't demonize those people that we disagree with. And if you listen to what we're going to play in a moment, you're going to hear me saying exactly those things. And my feeling right now is a lot of anger, and that I'm suddenly it's funny, there's a person on Facebook who I disagree with politically, and she and I have gone round and round for a decade.
Yeah.
And I said something about President Trump, and she said, well, we feel the same way about Obama. And I said, if you try to compare them, I will unfriend you, which I would never have said last week, is that I am tired of the false narrative that these things are equivalent. I am tired of the normalization of what our president has done. I am tired of the lack of acknowledgement of systemic racism within our society. I am tired of the equivalency between actions of the police and actions of the looters. Nobody I have heard of, no reasonable person has said the looting is justified or good.
Right.
Every single reasonable person that I have heard has condemned the looting, just as you did, just as I do. But that does not compare to the actions I've seen of the police over the last week.
Yeah.
Because, and this is my feeling, and I'm going to express myself in a way that I rarely do because I'm angry, is that my feeling is that I do not hold police officers, who I generally respect and have always been a respectful, law-abiding citizen. I do not hold them to the same standard I hold ordinary citizens to. I hold them to a higher standard. I am a firm believer in with great power comes great responsibility.
Yep.
And what I have seen in the actions of the police of pepper spraying unarmed people who are peacefully protesting, arresting people who are speaking in a way that is peaceful. Like there's that guy who's saying to the police how he loves them, and they drag him away and handcuff him. The attacks on the press.
Yeah.
And not only do I find that it is, and here's the thing, is that this is a protest that was caused by systemic racism and the maltreatment of African Americans throughout 400 years of American history.
Yep.
And the fact that the police would respond with brutality, not all of them, of course.
Right.
And many, I mean, and there, there's so many instances that made me weep of police officers kneeling down with the protesters, of marching with the protesters, of stripping off the riot gear and saying, we are with you. And you see the effect that has.
Yeah.
That they are met with joy and with love and with hugs, and then you see this other side of them.
Mm-hmm. And
I am so angry about it that I couldn't release that short episode talking about, freedom of speech and all the things that I really believe in without first saying that we're in a moment in American history that is unique, not only in my lifetime, but in our entire history. This does not compare to Watergate. The only thing that we're close to is the Civil War. Is that there is a fracturing of what the values of American society are. And it's funny, I've always been a believer in that Martin Luther King quote of that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And that's what I always believed. And so even though there was, one step back and two steps forward and then three steps back, and, even though we had those moments, I always thought we were bending towards justice. And I think what happened this last weekend was that faith in that concept for me got broken, and it made me angry.
Yeah, we've talked off camera, you and I. But by the way, those are excellent words, Steve. You and I have talked off camera, and I've been saying this for a couple of years now, and Michael Vogel will back this up, fellow geek buddy. I have said that we are heading towards a civil war, and I saw it from the first year of Trump's presidency. The anger that built from one side towards President Obama, was at times shocking, overwhelming. People tried to twist narratives to make him into a terrible person. Whether there's racism behind that, I think is up to each person individually. Whether there was legitimate issues with political points of views are up to each person individually. But I feel that that they saw a strong Democratic black man in office who was beloved by the world, beloved by a majority of Americans, so much so that all that vitriol, he still got reelected by a sizable margin the second time around. So much so that in the end, you could say, whatever your anger was towards him, he did the right thing most of the time. In comes Trump, which was a complete and utter shock to me. And I'll reveal this now in a way that I don't think I've ever said this before, but part of why I wanted to commit suicide the night I wanted to commit suicide, if you look at the day, it was the day after Trump was elected, or the night that Trump was elected. I had an overwhelming sense of hopelessness that consumed me to the point that was beyond anything I've ever experienced in my life. And ending my life seemed easier or the smarter move than proceeding forward with a man like this in the presidency. Because I had a belief, an instinctual gut belief, that this man would destroy the fabric of our society, destroy the foundations of our democracy in ways that we've never seen before. We've had corrupt administrations before, we've had corrupt presidents before, but they were always held to task by a system of checks and balances. Even Nixon, and people go back and look, it wasn't all Republicans going, Nixon, you got to get out of here. There were a lot of people who supported Nixon at that time, but eventually enough Republicans saw the light and had him impeached for what he did. Trump has done far worse in his corruption and in his misuse of the office, his rhetoric, which he uses to inflame Americans to fight amongst each other, because he isn't going to care. He's going to fly off in his golden helicopter to his golden tower, and if things get really crazy in this country, he'll take off in his golden plane to some place where he can't be touched, while the rest of us kill each other. And that is heartbreaking. And that's what consumed me that night. And everything that I feared has come to pass. Every single thing. And Putin over there in Russia is laughing his butt off, watching us destroy each other over basic human rights. We have a right. If you're going to cry to me about the Second Amendment and tell me they're coming to take our guns and blah, 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 then by the same token, the right to peaceful assembly, you must respect all the amendments. If you're going to respect one amendment, you need to respect all the amendments. And that is the thing at the end of the day. And sending people in to instigate the police or having the police react in such a strong manner and bringing in the military and the National Guard, all of that as a quote unquote show of force is dictator-like. And we have all been afraid that he's been marching towards dictatorship. And the weaker people of the other side who've been like Neville Chamberlain the crap out of this thing have frustrated the hell out of me, because a stronger response from the beginning, regardless of political backlash, is how we should have been operating from the beginning. And now it's almost too late. And I don't know what the end result is going to be, to be honest with you. You see us all fighting in the streets. I don't know. I'm encouraged by the fact that protesters go back out every day. Every day, these young men and women, old men and women go out there to protest. It's a young man's game. I wish I could go out there. I can't. I have too much to lose with my girlfriend and everything, and what I've got here. I just don't have the strength to do it anymore. But in my 20s, I was out there protesting with a lot of people about things. Watching these young men and women go back out there to protest, I am encouraged by that. They're not afraid. They're emboldened. More people came to the White House the next day after they had tear gassed everybody so that he could have his photo up. More protesters came out the next day, and that encourages me. That inspires me. That lets me know the American spirit is not dead. The American spirit is not hopeless. The American spirit is not feeling despondent. The American spirit is as strong as ever to fight, to defend our country and our way of life against someone who's looking to destroy it. And I know some of you listening to us, maybe Trump supporters, we've had some people come at us on Facebook about it, but this is our feeling about it. And you, as a rational human being, cannot see a president using military forces like the National Guard and threaten to use active duty military against its own citizens because of protests is mind-blowing. And I know there's looters and rioters, and I get that. Certainly the police can handle that. But the overall protests are not causing fights in the streets, and that's what concerns me, is this narrative is being twisted. And even today we had Defense Secretary Mike Esper come out and say we didn't tear gas those people, when there's complete video of them tear gassing the protesters, and then claim that there were buckets of sticks and bricks around the corners at these people, which no one has any evidence of, pictures of, video of. And when they come at the press, that's even more scary, because Trump has made Trump has made a point of saying they are the enemy of the people, because they cover Trump mostly 95% accurately about the crap he's doing. And Trump is mad that he's getting called out for the crimes that he's committing and his family are committing in that office. And now we come back to this, and Steve, I'm sorry to keep going, but we come back to this idea of entertainment and how it connects to politics. So many great films have spoken truth to power. Do the Right Thing, certainly in 1989, was a powder keg of a film that exploded onto the scene because people were afraid to face the fact that this was happening. Police brutality was happening. Gangster rap in the early 90s spoke all about that on the West Coast and some on the East Coast, police brutality. Back once we were done with the Kangos and all that, and doing the Run DMC stuff and the early LL Cool J stuff, eventually we moved on to the harder rap, and that was the gangster, what they call gangster rap. But that rap that spoke about police brutality, spoke about how the police were biased towards African Americans in their communities, and that has been a persistent drumbeat for decades now. And it finally exploded after the George Floyd situation, and so many people have voiced their displeasure across the world. There have been marches in the UK, in the Netherlands, in so many different countries in support of Black Lives Matter. My soccer team, Liverpool, when had their training, and they all stood in the circle in the middle of the field of the soccer training and got down on one knee in support of the protests. That tells you how widespread this is, and this is why they fear the protests, because it is so powerful. what is happening here. So it must be met in their minds and in Trump and his administration minds with the equal amount of power. And to them, that is the military, the full, possibly active duty military. Regardless of what Mike Esper said today, it's Trump who decides when that active military is going to be used. So I think they fear this protest movement more than they feared anything before, because they actually see behind the scenes Republican donors running from Trump, Republican supporters running from Trump behind the scenes. And that scares him for his reelection, scares him because he might get exposed for all these crimes he might have committed in office and all the favoritism that's been displayed. So I think that's 100% what's behind all of this.
So that's a lot, and I think you and I are in the same place here. We got a lot to say. We got a lot of emotion about this, and here's the thing that I'm thinking about, and it relates in a weird way to art and politics.
Yep,
is that there is a portion of what our leaders are supposed to do, which is beyond policy.
Yeah.
It's beyond the nuts and bolts. So you might believe that taxes should be low, or you might believe that taxes should be high. You might believe in a woman's right to choose, or you might believe in the sanctity of life of a fetus.
Yeah.
You might believe that climate change is real or not real, or have different priorities about healthcare or not. But there are certain things. There are certain things that we expect our leaders to do. And in a way, it falls more into the category of art.
Yeah.
Which is we expect our leaders to lead. And, you talk about Richard Nixon. Now, Richard Nixon is not on my list of favorite presidents.
No.
Although he was an intelligent person, and there are things I can point to, like founding the EPA and the Clean Water Act, things like that, where
Absolutely.
I can go, man, I'm really glad Nixon did those things.
Yeah.
After Kent State, what did Richard Nixon do? He went to the Lincoln Memorial and spoke to young people.
Yeah.
Now, did Richard Nixon like the free speech movement and the hippie movement? No. He hated them. And if you listen to his tapes of what he said about those movements and the FBI investigations he turned into various people who were part of those movements,
Yeah.
He hated them. And yet, at the moment that our nation was in crisis, he went and showed what it means to be a leader, even though he didn't agree with it. And this is where I go, like, it's almost like I want to say, in defense of lip service, there is a time when we need our leaders not to create policy, but in a way to create art, to create that moment of coming together, to create that moment to say we are a nation. And that was the moment that we needed our president, a leader.
Yeah.
If he had come out and said, we will work together to solve these issues, we are one nation, then maybe things would have settled down. But instead, he did the opposite. And this is the thing. I think that Donald Trump has a strange innate genius, unlike any other leader that I know of in history. And I read a lot of history. There's the expression that came out of Goebbels, I think, in Nazi Germany, which was the idea of the big lie. And what the big lie is that if you say something that is not true, like Jews are of a great conspiracy to destroy the world, and you say it often enough and loud enough, people will begin to accept it as the truth. Yeah. And I think what Donald Trump has done is to invent a new thing, which is the little upset, the little lie, thousands and thousands of ones that are so bewildering and offensive and confusing that we actually can't focus on them. Because each time you try to talk about it, to investigate it, by the time you dig in, there's another one and another one. And many of them are very small. How big is his crowd at the inauguration? Right. Totally unimportant. It's a lie, but it doesn't really matter. And while we're focusing on that, there's another one. And then there's another one. That right now, like literally 108,000 Americans, I believe right now, have died from COVID-19.
Yeah, but no one's talking about it.
We're not talking about it. Yeah. Like we're talking, is that this is the thing. And as soon as people are talking about him using police force to clear a park so he can have a photo op at a church that he's never visited with a Bible that he's never read, as soon as we start digging into that, there's going to be another one and another one. And this is the thing, is that this is where I am not feeling that respectful right now. Most of the time, I will respect other people's differences of opinion. But if you do not acknowledge that this man is a liar, well, I don't really have anything to talk to you about. Right. If you don't acknowledge that he has destroyed norms within our country, norms that we all just accepted, everything from releasing your tax forms to at least having a a show of cooperating with congressional investigations, to respect for various positions in the government, any of those things, if you don't acknowledge that he has destroyed those things and probably done permanent damage to our society because of it, and it's like, you can hate Barack Obama. I am critical of certain things.
Sure.
For instance, foreign policy, I think that he didn't handle it well.
I agree.
I think there's lots of things to be critical of him, and you can disagree with him about policy.
Yeah.
But I don't think you can point to, the guy's squeaky clean.
Yep.
Were there some small scandals in the course of his presidency? Yeah, small ones. Yeah. But there's no comparison. There's no comparison with Nixon, with Clinton, with name whatever president you hate the most. There's no comparison with what is going on today in our society.
Yeah. You wonder, Steve, has this been a long time coming? Have we been waiting? I mean, like this doesn't happen overnight. This kind of anger, this kind of, from both sides, by the way, this kind of reaction, because I watched some Fox News stuff, and Greg Gutfeld, he talking over Juan Williams, screaming his fool head off, getting red-faced. It's all for show. It's just a show. And like a red-faced person, he's a clown. He's a clown. And that kind of stuff, they have to yell. Because if they don't yell, then the truth gets out. If they don't obfuscate it, the truth gets out. Actual logical, rational approaches to things get out. And they can't have that, because that threatens their power or perceived power. And so when you watch someone go ape shit like that on TV, you just immediately go, nope, you don't believe a word you're saying. This is all desperate, insane banter to try to stop people from actually taking a moment to think. And I think I believe in America. I believe in Americans.
Me too.
Once they're fully presented with the picture, they'll make the right decision most of the time, if not all the time, but most of the time for sure. And we've seen this numerous times. There were abolitionists during slavery times. There were people who fought back against the South, and not the South necessarily as a bloc, but certainly against the idea of owning slaves, right? Yes, you can argue, well, was that the full intention of the North, blah, blah, blah. If you want to get to the minutia of it, feel free. But that was an overwhelming part of it. So we've always stepped up. The civil rights movement, right? White people went down there and risked their lives to ride those buses and protests down in southern states to get hit by hoses or attacked by dogs, or get racists to have thrown bricks at them or chase them down in cars and kill them, bury them, and then eventually get found out. That has happened throughout the course of history. There have been people who have been willing to be on the right side of history. How many homosexuals, as we walk into Pride, how many members of the LGBTQ community have taken beatings and the bumps and been killed in efforts to raise awareness for their rights? Women as well, the suffragette movement and everything that happened from there, and still fighting into the ERA, which we never did pass in the 70s, fighting for their rights. The Me Too movement. Eventually we hit a breaking point, and America does the right thing. We have been, and this may shock a lot of you who were listening who might be Trump supporters or conservatives, we have always been a progressive country. We just haven't been as progressive as quickly as some others might like, but we have always been a progressive country. And I believe that everything Trump is doing now will blow up in his face, not literally, obviously, figuratively, and Americans will go, that's too far. Once they see their brothers and sisters being shot in the streets for simply protesting, that's too far. Once they see them getting beat up and bloodied and hurt and shoved down and stepped on, I saw knees on necks over the weekend again. Yeah. Once they see that in such massive force, the minority of people who support that won't be enough to stop the majority of people who want to not have that be the symbol of our country. And when other countries are looking at us and they're seeing the way we're treating our American citizens, and they're saying, my God, I thought they were supposed to be the paragons of virtue. They were supposed to be the better country in this world as the leaders of the free world. It's a bad image for us to convey across the world. And I think eventually Americans will see that in mass. And if we get to vote in November, by the way, I'm in my head, I've started to doubt whether he's going to let us vote in November with that mail-in ballot crap that he's pushed, that narrative the Republicans are pushing. But if they let us vote in November, I think he will get voted out. I think his entire party gets voted out.
By the way, did you see today? And this is in the Washington Post, but I haven't confirmed it elsewhere. But that he registered to vote in Florida for his absentee ballot, but didn't use his Florida address.
I thought we were supposed to stop voter fraud with the mail-in ballot and the absentee ballots.
Yeah,
that is voter fraud.
So I'm trying to think. I've been trying to figure out how to articulate something, which is that if a whole bunch of people say the same thing over a long period of time, it might not be true. It's possible it's not true.
Right.
But you should listen. So for hundreds of years, literally hundreds of years, African Americans have said that they have been abused by the police, by law enforcement, by the government, by banks, by real estate agents, by housing associations, by all of these places.
Yeah.
And if 15% of the American population says that this is real, I think you should take that seriously.
Yeah.
Every African American man I've spoken to and asked this question of, and I've asked a fair amount, have you ever been pulled aside, pulled over for driving while black? Yeah. And every one of them has said yes, and not just once, but many, many times.
Yeah, yeah.
Have you ever been pulled over for no reason?
No, I have never experienced that, but I have been in the car when my friend experienced that.
Yeah.
And that was an eye-opening experience in my 20s. And my friend, who how can I say this? I don't want to out his name, but my best friend in the world, who is black, legitimately, he is black. He has been the city manager of a couple of cities. He has told me the number of times he's been pulled over while he's black. And he is like the city manager, and he's been pulled over in those respective cities by the very same police he is city managing. Well, and that is insane.
I was walking through Little Tokyo with my son, and we saw a beautiful yellow Corvette convertible and an African-American man, and he's just pulled over to the side of the road. And my kid, who's very social and outgoing, talks to anybody he sees. And so he says, "Cool car, dude." And the guy looked over at us, and he was so upset. And he went, "What?" And then he went, "Sorry, I'm really, really sorry. I just got pulled over because someone thought I stole this car." Wow. And it's like, that experience alone is horrendous. And this is the thing. And, and I've done some research about, there's sort of a decision tree of how a police officer escalates in the field. At what point do you ask someone to get out of the car? At what point do you use a stronger voice? At what point do you place your hand on your weapon? At what point do you put your hands on the person? At what point do you pull your weapon out? At what point do you use the taser or frisk someone or whatever it is? And that all it takes is that if you add 5% to your suspicion of a certain person based on the color of their skin, then each one of those escalations happens sooner. Yeah. And that describes the experience of stop and frisk. It describes the experience of get out of the car. It describes the experience of the car getting searched. It describes the experience of being put on the ground and handcuffed, and all these things that African Americans have described as happening to them for literally hundreds of years. Mm-hmm. And so, first of all, if you believe that these people are lying, and I've spoken to a police officer who, when I've said the thing about, who's a friend of mine, who, when I've said the thing about every African-American I know this has happened to him, he said, well, they did something. See, and if you have that attitude in and of itself, to think of an entire group of people who for hundreds of years have repeatedly said the same thing, and to assume that they must be lying, that is racism.
And by the way, and that's a very well said, Steve. Absolutely, very well, powerfully said. And to be fair, there are black people who commit crimes. There are white people who commit crimes. There are Latino people who commit crimes. There are. But to completely focus on one race, and it seems to be consistently one race, that you implement this anger, this deathly interaction with, is incorrect. Just like if we were to say the entire police department is corrupt because 4 or 5 police officers have let their anger get the best of them in situations with black men. What we're saying is there's a systemic issue here. And that has been shown out in numerous pieces of media and film. Fruitvale Station is another one. There have been a number of movies that have addressed the issue of being black in this country from numerous filmmakers. And so you see it. And that is what's happening in this world. And so we're asking, and what I think what everyone is trying to say, or rational people are trying to say, is, hey, let's just take a look at this and let's make sure it stops. But what we're discovering now, Steve, is it's not a simple black and white issue, and no pun intended. It's not a simple black and white issue. There is so much involved here now that I've discovered the last few days. The idea of funding the police, how that affects situations like this as well. The idea of who gets us, the police don't live in the communities that they police in. That is a huge part of this as well. There is so much that systematically needs to be changed, starting with some of the police unions having to change how they approach this, right? So all of that, this is a very complex issue, and it has to be addressed and dismantled and then built back up again so that everyone feels safe with the police. I had Jared Habon on, who, from The Bachelor and stuff. Jared has been a frequent guest on my sports shows. First time he was on my sports show this past Monday with Jay Washington and Winston Marshall. And he said, I have never been afraid of the police. Right. Whenever the police show up, I always feel safe. And that is something that probably 95%, well, I don't want to give quotes, but I mean, probably a majority, if not almost the entire black race, has never felt that way in mass in this country.
Well, and here's the thing, and I'll say two different things. The first is that when there is a murder in the African-American community, or violence or crime, the African-American community condemns it. Yeah. This is terrible. How can this, immediately condemns it. When there is an action by a police officer, the police tend to, not all of them, but tend to rally around and justify it. Yeah. And that is one of the key differences. And here's another thing I'll say. Again, I believe that if you think that all of these African Americans are lying, that is a sign of your prejudice against that race. Yeah. But let's just say, for argument's sake, and of course I don't believe this, let's just say that it's not true. If you were Apple Computers, or if you were General Motors, and there was 15% of the population that said you had been racist towards them and were mistreating them, and you went, that's not true, we have no evidence of this, it's not true, not true at all, you would still do everything in your power to change your image among that community. Yeah. Is that just the fact that so many people with so many interactions with the police are frightened, are terrified, is a sign that the police are doing something wrong. Is that because the more frightened people are of the police, the less likely they are to cooperate with the police. Yes. The less good citizens they become, the more distrustful they become, the worse witnesses they become. And it's bad for society on every single level. And even if it weren't true, which it is true, even if it weren't, it would be incumbent upon the police department to resolve this situation. Yeah. That is what has to, and we see there are communities that have police departments that practice de-escalation, that practice interactions with communities, and things get better. Does it solve the problems? No. We got a long way to go to solve we're not going to solve these problems, but we can work towards solutions. We can improve things. And I'm not saying that the police should just let criminals go. Of course not. I am saying that when someone is on their knees or with their hands handcuffed behind their back, they shouldn't shoot pepper spray into their face. Yeah. That is not necessary.
Yeah. And, walking away, admitting you're wrong, walking away and reevaluating your approach to something is an American thing to do. It's a human thing to do. Throughout our history, we have made mistakes, taken a step back, and adjusted and changed for the better as a country. And that's what I think gets lost here. You have a commander-in-chief who refuses to admit that he's wrong about anything. Ever. He's like a basketball player that has never, in his mind, committed a foul in his entire life. Yeah. And it's super frustrating to watch happen because it sends a very terrible message and encourages others to also not admit that they're wrong. To think that is an actual sign of strength when it is a blatant sign of weakness. You have been wrong. All of you listening to us have had an altercation with somebody, family or friend or stranger, where you realized, shit, I shouldn't have said that, or shit, that was wrong. I shouldn't have done that. And you've gone and apologized.
Yep.
Are you a terrible person for doing that? Or are you a better person? And that's all I think these protests are about. Please stop killing us. Please take a look at this and what's happening here, and please change this. And having that O'Brien idiot come out on Sunday and say there is no systemic racism sets everything back, because he's placating the police unions and the people he thinks that are going to vote for Trump. And that's the frustrating part of it, is because I think we're a better country when we realize the mistake and make the change, not when we just obstinately push our opinions through and believe we're 100% right no matter what anybody says. That is not actually the American point of view. That's a dictator point of view. The American point of view, which is what our founding fathers wanted and set up, is debate to reach a conclusion, debate to reach a bill, agreement on a legislation. It is debate within the House of Representatives, the Senate, and then eventually the president himself debating possibly with people there in the Senate or in the House. That is what is set up by our founding fathers. So don't crow to me about the founding fathers when you advocate a dictatorship. That is everything the founding fathers were against. They were about communication, about conversation. Yeah, you can throw up, well, they held slaves. Fine. But the basic point of view, their approach to government, because they left a dictatorship in England at the time, was to have conversation and debate, not a dictatorship that is ruled by one point of view only. And that's what we're seeing now, as so many Republicans stay quiet about what Trump did by gassing those protesters out of there so that he could take his photo op. I mean, you could just watch, I think it was Casey, I forget her name there on NBC, maybe it's Casey Hunt. She has video of her trying to ask every single Republican senator who was walking into a meeting, about what they thought about what Trump did. And to the person, they either A, said they were a little bit disturbed by it, or B, said they didn't see it, didn't have time to see it. Or Romney, in all his gall for supposedly being against Trump, said, I was having lunch, I didn't have time to watch it. Get the hell out of here. If it mattered to you, you would have made time to watch it. Don't give me that. Even if you're sitting in the shitter, taking a dump, you could have pulled it up on your phone and watched it. So there are ways to watch, so that all of that is just a political cover for what they see happening here. And maybe some of them behind the scenes are kind of really talking to people in the administration to make this change. We've heard differing points of views come out of here. So we'll see, man. I mean, I don't feel as hopeless as I felt yesterday, but that could be temporary. And tomorrow I could feel just as hopeless again as I felt yesterday. We'll see. And I don't know, obviously, Steve, I don't know where you're at, or it seems like you're in that place as well. The feeling of like, I don't know what to do here and I'm angry.
Yep. Three things, and I know this quote unquote intro is now well, longer.
We did say it was a medium, not a short.
Yeah, we've gone beyond medium, but here are three things. The first thing I would say is that in every sport, and you're much more the sports guys than me, there are people. There's always going to be a little pushing of the rules. So there's going to be a little bit of holding on the lines. You're going to get physical in the paint, whatever it is. That's part of the game.
Yes, absolutely. Gamesmanship. Yes.
That's what happens. And yes, sometimes the ref calls it and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes there's a guy who really pushes that envelope really far. And sometimes there's a guy who plays much more in the rules. But if someone walked out onto the basketball court with a baseball bat and started hitting people with it, they have ruined the game. Right. There's a certain point at which you're no longer pushing the rules, you're breaking the game. And the thing about Donald Trump, and this is I think the most important thing about his character is that all he cares about is Donald Trump and what people think of Donald Trump. So he literally said there's too many tests because the more tests you get, the more cases you get. And that makes him look bad. All he cares about is making himself look good. He doesn't care about actually being good. So he wants to lie about how tall his building is so people will believe he has the tallest building in New York. He doesn't care if he actually has the tallest building in the world, New York. He just wants people to believe that. And when you have someone like that, it becomes extremely difficult to deal with them because their priorities are entirely different. And the weak, feckless nature of the Republican Party to not stand up to this guy over and over again. Like we said when he got elected, or even before, like this is going to be real trouble. But there was always the belief, well, there's the institutions will keep him in check. There's the Congress will keep him in check. People, and what we have seen over and over again is that is not the case. Yep. During the impeachment, Susan Collins said he learned his lesson. Trump will never learn a lesson.
Yeah.
This is it for him. This is what he will be. And he will continue to do these things. And his narcissism, his incompetence, his insanity, his nastiness, his all of these things will continue to drag our country down and down and down until someone makes him go away. And I'm a person who believes, I'm a person who believes in reaching across the aisle. I believe in finding ways to make deals with people who don't agree with you. But at this moment, I think the entire Republican Senate needs to be voted out. That's what I think.
Strong statement.
Yeah.
I'm just going to add one thing, and as I don't 100% go along with you, but I do think if they don't step up, it's difficult to reach across the aisle if you can't even agree on the basic fundamental definition of human rights.
Yeah.
And for all American citizens. And not that ridiculousness that Mitch McConnell delivered yesterday. Really believe in the rights of all American citizens and not using them as political props. And this is important. Today Trump tweeted out about that 77-year-old gentleman who was killed by the looters or the rioters or whoever it was, defending a pawn shop from being looted. He was shot in the head and killed, unfortunately. That's the only tweet he put out. He didn't put any tweet out about George Floyd. No picture of George Floyd, rather. He put out a picture of this gentleman because it fits his political benefit. There's no real humanity behind it. It's about fitting his political benefit because because the gentleman was a former police officer. He's once again playing to his base, playing to the police officer base. And that is unfortunate because then he's also committing racism all over again by using this gentleman, this black man, for his own political benefits, his naked political benefit, instead of the actual truth, which is that this gentleman was an unfortunate casualty of this escalating war between both sides, that he is absolutely absolutely to blame for, not fully, but certainly part of it, and most of it to blame for, in my opinion.
One of the things I admired President Obama the most about, and I think this worked to his detriment for most of his career as president, is that he liked complexity. Yeah. He liked to look at both sides. So his, the Reverend Wright speech in 2008 when he was running for president about racism, and he said that his grandmother, who he loved, used the N-word, is that he didn't just say these are bad people and these are good people. He kind of said, to quote Avenue Q, everybody's a little bit racist, and that this is complicated and it's generational. And he presented a complicated thing. When there was the shooting of police in Dallas and he made the speech, he said things about the service of police officers and the bravery and the courage and the respect he has for police officers and the tragedy that that innocent police officers were assassinated. But he also spoke about being a young black man and that he had his own feelings and that he felt like Trayvon Martin or whoever it was, and that he presented something in complexity. And if you watched his speech on Fox News, they only showed one half of it. Is they just showed the side where he talked about young African-American men being killed and not the side where he talked about cops. Trump has no such issues. Trump is going to say whatever he wants to get people angry and on his side. And this is complicated. The looting is horrible. People dying because of this is horrible. And we need to approach this with some complexity. And maybe this is, I think we talked a long time, and maybe this is a way to sort of segue into the original question, is that what we present to the world, the stories we tell about ourselves, even ones that aren't 100% true, are important. Was John F. Kennedy the person that he claimed to be in his speeches? Not exactly. But his speeches were important. Is that the image we present of America to the world is important. And right now, that image is in bad shape. And maybe we need some artists. We need the next Frank Capra. We need those people to articulate a vision of America in the 21st century that can move forward and make something better than what we have right now.
And every single Hollywood studio, and of course, maybe they're listening, maybe they're not. Maybe you guys have forwarded this onto them. Every single film and TV studio needs to make a concerted effort to hear from those creators who are trying to create films about this, TV shows about this, not to inflame tensions, but to explain, to bridge the divide, to show, to display, to explore, and to educate, and eventually to evolve the viewer that's watching it into a different mindset and frame of mind that is more, I guess how can I say, is more evolved in the end. Yeah.
100% agree. And that was, I love how you said that. And I think that's a good place to now segue to a week and a half ago when John and I were a lot less angry at discussing this question from our great supporter on Patreon about art and politics. Hello and welcome to another edition of Cine-Files Shorts. This is our time where we get to answer your questions, and we got a question from Ryan Lieb that both John and I read and said, "Oh, we got to do that." And not only do you say we got to do that, but like this might be a medium, not a short. It might even move into a long, because this is a fascinating question that Ryan asked. It's a long email, but I'm going to read the whole thing. He says, "Is art inherently political? It's a bit of an ambiguous and loaded question, and something I frequently disagree with my friends about. Many people tell me that art does not exist in a vacuum, and therefore artists have a responsibility to tailor their art to the current social and political climate. But I personally believe that art is best when it is allowed to act to some degree as if it is in a vacuum, even though obviously it is not. For example, is it wrong to cast a cisgender actor as a trans character because trans people are at a disadvantage in our current society? Is it wrong to use certain words in your scripts that people today are particularly sensitive to? Is it wrong to give characters stereotypical traits because it benefits the story you're trying to tell? On the flip side, is it right to say artists can or cannot or should not do specific things with their art because of the political implications? And lastly, does art animate life or does life animate art? Should artists bear responsibility for how their art impacts society, or do you think their potential for destructive social impact is often exaggerated?" This is a subject I think a lot about, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Wow.
Yeah, Ryan, man, there's a lot there. And I'm trying to think of what the best way to approach this is, because
section by section, maybe.
I think here's where I would like to start.
Okay,
this is my philosophy: is that I believe, and I won't talk about all art. I'm not going to talk about painting or dance or things like that, but to talk about just art that has to do with storytelling. I believe the first job is to entertain. That is primary. And by entertain, I mean that my job is to get you to want to be listening to this podcast, watching this film, reading this book, reading this comic book, and want to turn the page, and that you enjoy the experience. And sometimes a joy can mean you're bursting into tears, but it means you're having an emotional experience that you want to continue. If I fail to do that, then I failed entirely. And anything, politics, philosophy, all of that is secondary to me keeping your intention in a way that you like. And that I think that the main way in storytelling that we do that is by exploring to some degree the human condition. And that might be through comedy. It might be through the things we're most frightened of. It could be through, thrilling action sequences, something. We're exploring some aspect of humanity. And so sometimes exploring that aspect of humanity has to brush up against what we might call politics. But I don't think politics is ever is necessarily the primary. The primary is you got to want to listen to my story.
Yeah, well, to me, Ryan's questions, I would say throughout this whole thing are seeking generalizations. And I can't give you generalizations, Ryan, because generalizations do not exist in my world when it comes to art. I think everything is a case-by-case basis. You can't say, I will always separate the art from the artist, or I will always separate, or I will not separate the art from the artist. You can't say, why is this? It should be the best person for the part. Why? Because the equality of casting, the equality of people who've been able to play these parts in the past has not been level. If it had been level, then absolutely you cast the best person for the part. But I like the fact that we're becoming more aware of these kinds of situations and that the fandom is becoming more aware of it. We recently just had Batwoman, Ruby Rose. She stepped away from the role. Of course, there were problems on both sides. I think WB wanted her to step away from the role, and she wanted to step away from the role. But she was a lesbian actress who was cast to play a character who isn't a member of the LGBTQ community. And now they want to replace her with another member of the LGBTQ community. And I think that's correct. I think that's right. If there were 40 gay superheroes, then you wouldn't need to do that. But because there isn't, and this is an important one, I think it is okay to be aware of it, to be respectful of that. As far as using certain words or using certain, storylines in your film, that is up to you as the artist. And then the people who are going to patronize your art will let you know if they liked it or not. And if nobody comes to see it, guess what? They didn't like it. They didn't like that you put those words in, and they didn't like that you chose that storyline. They didn't like it that you did what you did with the script, and that you defaulted using stereotypical paths to get a result down the road in your film. They saw your stereotypes coming, didn't invest in your characters, and then didn't like the end. So to me, it's always a case-by-case basis. You can get away with stereotypes if you've built your construct really strongly. I'm in the middle of the 4th season of House of Cards, and there have been a couple of stereotypical characters that frustrated the piss out of me, because every other character has so much depth and complexity and layers, but they're being put in to advance the storyline. But I don't mind it overall, because the overall effect of it still works for me. So it's all a case-by-case basis and how you've constructed your art to work. I don't think art works in a vacuum, but I think you can appreciate art in a vacuum, right? You can absolutely watch it if you want to watch In the Heat of the Night and you see a good crime thriller. That's all you see. And that's all you see. That's totally fine for you if you want to do that. However, if you want to ignore what's actually happening, what this film is really about, which is about racism in the South, and how it's still, there's still racist to black people, no matter how accomplished they are. That is your choice to ignore that storyline. But another person can come by and say, I see that storyline and I love that film for that reason. And that's how you approach it. Now, if you have people telling you that you need to appreciate a certain way, then I don't think that those people are incorrect. You are allowed to experience art as you see fit, and they are allowed to experience art as they see fit. But again, I don't think most great artists create art in a vacuum. They create it to say something to you as the viewer or the observer or the consumer. They want to have an effect on you with the art that they're creating here.
I have so many thoughts, and I'm trying to think of where to start. And I think my bias to some degree, I think, comes from the fact that I was born in the 60s.
Yeah.
I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area in the 70s. Mm-hmm. That's the land of hippies. Yes. And the origins of the free speech movement. Both my parents went to Berkeley in the early 60s, the real time of the free speech movement. They're pre-hippie. And then I went to Berkeley in the 80s and graduated in 91. And the free speech movement in particular is really, really powerful to me. It's really important. And the world that I was brought up in was a world that was responding against the restrictive nature of the past.
Yes.
Saying we need to talk about these things, whether it was Lenny Bruce and his comedy, whether it was Sam Shepard and his plays, whether it was the entire movement of the 70s cinema, the hippie movement, and people saying, you can't tell me how to dress. You can't tell me how to speak. We should talk about our sexuality. We should talk about, the things inside of us, the gray areas that are difficult and painful. You listen to some of George Carlin's comedy, or you listen to Richard Pryor and say, like, we're going to talk about things that are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And what's so interesting to me is that was a movement really created by the left, mm-hmm. the liberals.
Yes.
And today it is the left that is more restrictive in saying what you cannot say, that you shouldn't say this language or have these kinds of characters or use these kinds of things, and so while I'm a lefty, everyone who, knows me and is listening to this podcast know I have a liberal worldview. Free speech part of my brain. Like I remember there was Milo Yiannopoulos, mm-hmm. who is a very right-wing, very likes a lot of controversy guy.
Yes.
And he had a date to speak at Berkeley. Right. And there was huge protests against him. And finally they said, don't come. We've canceled your speaking engagement. because he was, he's a radical right-wing guy who I hate all the stuff that he talks, homophobic, and, it's just horrible stuff, in my opinion. And there was the Daily Cal is the newspaper, the UC Berkeley newspaper. Mm-hmm. And in the Daily Cal, shortly after that, 5 people who were the leaders of the free speech movement in the early 60s said, "You have betrayed us." We don't like what Milo has to say either, but the whole point of the free speech movement is that people get to speak. And the thing is that, and this is where I have very complicated feelings about all this, is that, in my opinion, popular speech doesn't need protection. Nobody needs protection to say puppy dogs are cute, because nobody's shutting down the fact that dogs are cute.
How dare you?
Yeah, the only speech that needs protection is unpopular speech. Yeah. So Lenny Bruce attacking the Catholic Church in the early 60s, that needs protection, because the powerful world is saying you can't talk about that. Mm-hmm. And so where I believe that some of the best films of all time are films that are challenging. You think, like, one of your favorites, not one of my favorites, one of your favorites is French Connection. Yeah. And that Popeye Doyle is a racist, horrible, drunken asshole.
Yeah, pretty much.
Archie Bunker is a racist, horrible asshole.
Right.
And yet, particularly All in the Family, but a lot of the cinema and television of the 70s goes, let's look at that. Let's explore it. And we're going to say some words that are going to make you uncomfortable and get into some ideas that are going to make you uncomfortable. And maybe it's going to make you laugh, and it's going to make you think about things. So the idea of, I don't want anything to be off limits. I want artists, like, think about South Park. South Park is a great example of a show where nothing is off limits. And do I like everything South Park does? No. Some of the stuff I was like, man, that was too far. But I'm glad that exists.
Right. But would you like a show, Steve? And this is interesting because we're having this discussion. Would you like a show that was a Nazi-driven show about them executing Jewish people in the Holocaust that was from the Nazi point of view and celebrated the Nazi point of view? Would you want that on a television screen?
No.
Yeah, but would you stop it from happening? Well, would you try if you could?
Let me stall on that question for a moment.
All right.
By saying, so one of the big questions, and I think it was like 1980, was when the neo-Nazis were going to march in Skokie, Illinois.
Yes.
And for those of you who don't know, Skokie had a huge Jewish population, a lot of Holocaust survivors there. Right. And so naturally the neo-Nazis said, let's march there because it is the most controversial, we want to stir up trouble. We've seen the same thing recently. Yes. And this was a discussion around the Morris family dinner table when I was a kid. Well, what do we do? And really the response from my family at that time was, you got to let them march.
Yeah.
Our value, and you protest them and you say it's wrong and you say this is horrible and you stand and you have a much bigger counter protest than their march, and you march and you march and you speak. But if we say you can't march, then we violate these rules of freedom of speech, basic principles of our country. Absolutely. So now that I've stalled a little bit, I'm going to go back to my first rule. Is it possible that there is a profound, entertaining show about the human condition from the Nazi perspective?
Maybe
I actually think it is. But a show that celebrates the murder of Jews, I can't imagine. And I think first of all, who the fuck is going to let that on the air? Right. Who the hell wants to see it? And I think if someone said, I want to make this, then we protest it and we don't watch it and we say, no, that is not acceptable. But again, who am I to say that there isn't some way, I think there is a story you could tell about a soldier in the German army in World War II who is heroic or who is brave or sympathetic, even though he's fighting for the side of the enemy. I think that is possible. And that might be a profound story.
Right. But that's from your point of view and what maybe majority of people would want to see, right? But if there is a shift and we're seeing this now, the white supremacy, the Nazi stuff, that is starting to become a prevalent thing in our country, being courted by a certain side of the political spectrum. And you go, okay, well, what if those people start to own TV stations, start to own broadcasting arms, and they want to show a show where you get to know these Nazi guards and you give them lives, you give them complexity, you give them storylines and things of that nature, but they're still going out and committing some horrible things. I know I just mentioned House of Cards. Frank Underwood is a very terrible person. but it is played by a charming guy like Kevin Spacey, at least at the time. I know people have turned on him, and I respect that. But at the time,
he still might be charming.
Yeah, fair. But that's my point, right? But if there is a market for it in a free market economy, and there just might be with the advent of Nazism, or the return rather of Nazism and white supremacy, there just might be a market for that. Then as a supply and demand capitalist market in the media, there is a possibility that a show could exist like that. And at that point, do your principles still hold true that you defend its right to exist and be on the air?
It's a really hard question, and I don't want to shy away from it. To be in the position of defending the rights of Nazis is a real rough one, particularly as a Jewish guy,
right? Which is
and
why
so
I ask, yeah.
There is nothing in my life that is pro-Nazi. Let's be real clear about this.
Yes, very.
Do you know Chris Hedges, sort of a political philosopher, former Jesuit, writes these very, very heavy books.
Okay.
I've read several of them. They're extremely depressing. Mm-hmm. There's one book, I think it's called American Fascists, and it deals with the extreme right. And the thing he says, and I think that I am what this conversation is pointing out that I am a perfect example of this thing that he says, is that he says that the liberal progressive point of view, that tolerance is a pillar of that. That you get to live your life your way and I get to live my life my way, and that we should even tolerate people that have views which we think are somewhat crazy. Right. And part of the reason for that is just what I said. Popular speech doesn't need protecting, and tolerance isn't about tolerating things you agree with. It's about tolerating things you really, really don't like. Yeah. And what he says is the fallacy of that is that and this is really to your point, the fallacy of that is that when you're being tolerant to people who are incredibly intolerant, they take advantage of your tolerance to push their cause forward. Yes. And the quote from him that is really powerful is, there is a certain point at which you must not tolerate intolerance. Yep. And that's a very difficult point for me. And I think you, in your question, have brought up exactly where that point is.
Yeah, because I struggle with it all the time. Oh, sorry, Steve, go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
Well, and that is that my basic fundamental belief is that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and that if someone is going to come at me with a Nazi argument, that I should be able to beat them in a fair fight, because my argument is better. Because I'm right and they are wrong. And their argument is flawed, disgusting, vile, anti-human, and ultimately self-destructive. And therefore, I want the argument. I'm like, bring it on, because I can take you down. However, history shows that I'm not right. Yeah. That there are times when those arguments have won, whether it's in Nazi Germany or in Pol Pot's Cambodia, or in, name your favorite horrible fucking massacre, is that somebody, even though the arguments that they were living by were ridiculous. Like, look at Mao's, Cultural Revolution, and the Great Leap Forward, and where millions of people died because of idiocy. Well, that proves that I'm wrong. And so to what you are saying, yes, there is a point where, no, you don't get to put your fucking Nazi show on the air. Absolutely not. But there's also a point where it's like, no, you do have to let, like one of the things he says is, should we let people use bad language that is offensive to people? Right. Now this is, and we can all assume, we can take guesses of what language he's talking about and what words, and these are words that are not in my vocabulary, that I wouldn't use. And yet, Shakespeare says the job is to put the mirror up to nature. People use those words. And by not portraying reality, we actually, I think, give it more strength. I think the way to take it down sometimes is to go right at it and show it, not avoid it.
Well, and I think that's why people have such a hard time with Tarantino stuff, right? The conversations and the confusion lies in the exploration of his ability to use the N-word, to give his characters just a free reign to use the N-word. You have people like Spike Lee who absolutely hate the fact that Tarantino is doing this and are mad that a white man is giving characters in his story who are liked by the audience, whether they're criminals or not. There's a charm to them. They're liked by the audience, and they say those words. And Tarantino's defense is, of course, he's showing the realistic dialogue that occurs between lower level criminals in his movies and the casualness with which they speak racist terms. And you got the other side where, and he put Sam Jackson in his movies, and Sam Jackson, who's been in a number of Spike Lee movies, defends Tarantino's usage of the N-word in those movies. So it becomes, in the end, a thing you can't actually make a solid decision about other than personally for yourself. You cannot make an objective decision about this kind of thing because there are people on both sides of the spectrum about it who you would turn to as the, in essence, the gatekeepers of the ability to use it or not use it in situations like this. So, yeah, I mean, that's the thing that's I find to be always complex about all of that. And what he asks here, does art imitate life or does life imitate art? It's should artists bear responsibility for how their art impacts society, or do you think their potential for destructive social impact is often exaggerated or isn't often exaggerated? Once again, it's a matter of taste, and it's a matter of, are they checking a box or are they influencing people to feel a certain way? Like, I just saw that Waco documentary on Netflix. Not documentary, sorry, the Waco show with Taylor Kitsch and Melissa Benoist. Fantastic show. But I also think they gave the Waco people a little too much understanding and the government not the equal amount of understanding. And that frustrated me personally as a military guy, but also as a guy who knows how cults can hurt people and can destroy people's self-esteem and mess them up of how they view relationships. And the fact that this guy was sleeping with 13-year-old girls, 12-year-old girls, a number of these ladies who were in the Waco compound have given interviews and spoken about it. Yet there's not one sequence other than with a 15-year-old where we see Taylor Kitsch's, whatever his name was, David Koresh, sleeping with a 12-year-old or 13-year-old girl. And in my opinion, if you want to show the fairness, if you want to like defend them a little bit, show him sleeping with a 12-year-old girl or show him taking a 13-year-old girl into his bedroom. I don't mean show them actually doing the act, but I mean take him so you get the idea that this guy was in essence a sexual monster who tried to hide himself behind these religious ideas. And people went along with it. So therefore, you've got the government who is at times, was a little too gung-ho and stupid and careless with what they did. The ATF, they were a little too careless. And some of the FBI members, by the same, and then you balance that out by showing the fact that Koresh was a despicable human being as well. I thought they were a little too lenient to Koresh, in my opinion, overall. And that could influence people to hate the government, to give them like even more ammunition. See this story. See, they hate the government. They have a right to hate the government and suspect the government, blah, blah, blah. So there is a sense of responsibility there that the filmmakers or the creators, I think, need to bear to present a balanced portrayal and let the audience make up their own mind, not steer the audience towards one way or another.
So as happens many times, you said so many interesting things that I'm kind of cataloging, like, oh, I want to respond to that. I want to respond to that. And I made the decision as you started talking about Waco that I went, okay, I'm not going to get into Waco. Like everything you said was really interesting. I'm not going to get into it. And then you said one thing that it's like, oh no, I have to get into Waco too, which is that the issue of showing the guy sleeping with a 13-year-old girl goes exactly into what we're talking about, because there's some people that would say you should never put that in a movie because we don't want people to think that that's okay. Or there might be some, person out there who gets ideas out of that, and then that's really bad. And so that falls into exactly this category. Do we hold the mirror up to the horrible thing in order to expose it? Or do we, and this is, I call this movies that model good behavior, like Captain America. It's like, that's who we want to be. Right. And there are other movies that expose bad behavior. Yeah. And then there's another area too, which is the exposing gray behavior, because people just aren't perfect.
True.
There are people that in a moment of anger or they say something insensitive or sexist or whatever. And they said that, I mean, you have, I'm sure, moments that you regret. I have moments that I regret, And so it's like trying to portray humans is like we always do everything right does a real disservice to art. I want to just comment quickly on Quentin Tarantino, because I think there's a good way to separate this. Is that you can separate whether or not the artist has the right to do something and whether or not you like it.
Sure,
I believe Quentin Tarantino, who is a genius, a brilliant person, has earned the right to do his art the way he wants to do it.
Sure.
I don't like it either. I'm with Spike Lee. I think that because, and it's just funny, in another short that we did, we talked about the idea of violence being titillating or pornographic.
Right.
I don't think Quentin Tarantino, maybe in Reservoir Dogs he was, but I don't think Quentin Tarantino in any of his recent films is doing it for the realistic, underbelly of the way the criminal classes talk.
Yeah.
I think he thinks it's fun.
Yes.
And Quentin Tarantino dialogue in and of itself is thrilling, because it's so beautiful. And putting that word in with his beautiful dialogue, I do have a problem with.
Right.
And this goes again to Ryan's question: is do artists have a responsibility for what effects their stuff might have? I think 100% yes. And I think there are people who watch Quentin Tarantino movies and they're thrilling and exciting and they want to emulate it, who will start using the N-word because Quentin Tarantino does. And I think he has to hold responsibility for that.
I think that's fair. Absolutely. Viggo Mortensen, I think recently, about a year or two ago, when he was doing the tour for Green Book, press for Green Book, used the N-word right in front of Mahershala Ali in a casual way. And it got him a lot of flack in that moment.
Well, today we have the phrase the N-word.
Yeah, we do.
So you should know not to use it. At the time
I agree.
that I did it, yeah.
I don't disagree with you. Absolutely. I think so too. I think I don't even rap that word in lyrics of songs that I thoroughly enjoy from the rap genre of music. I don't even in my car rap that word. So for me, when I see people rap that word, like Justin Bieber, like other people I've seen before, and maybe a couple of friends of ours I've seen rap that word at times, I get real iffy about it. It bothers me because I think there's a casualness that you use that word. I think there's a casualness that some people, in a way that some people use that word that don't understand the historical significance and implications of that word. And I think that has to be respected. And I don't like it. I don't tolerate that. And it frustrates me when I see it happening because people are so casual about it. But it's not that long ago. It really isn't. And we see shades of it returning again with a lot of stuff happening over the last couple of years now, emboldened from the top down in our country. And that's scary. And that's a shame, because we hoped we had progressed and we feel like we haven't now. And that's unfortunate. But, we'll see. We'll see with, I guess I just want to say one last thing here before we wrap up is that, I think art I think it's okay for art to be political, and it frustrates me when people go, oh, I just want to enjoy the film as it is. Well, it's not for you to do that. It's for you to enjoy it as you will, but you can't stop other people from analyzing the film and wanting to enjoy the film and appreciate the social implications, the political implications, the historical implications within their film or their TV show. You have a right to savor it as you wish, but you cannot complain that other people are looking at it and finding these things that the director or the author or the executive producer or even the actor and writer intended to put into that piece of media or piece of art. If it's there and they support it, then they have every right to look at it through a political landscape. If you don't want to see it through a political landscape, that's up to you to let that go. It's not up to other people to stop talking about it in a political way for you to be able to consume it. That's not correct. Everyone is allowed to consume art as they see fit. In my opinion, you're not allowed to tell other people how they can consume art or how they should consume art.
So I have several thoughts, as always. The first is that the most powerful thing you have as an audience member is your ability to not go to that movie.
Yes.
And your ability to go to the movie and say, that wasn't my taste. I did not like that. And you talk about why you didn't like it. That's totally fine. Whether, in my mind, and this is what I said at the very beginning, our job as artists is to explore the human condition. And in exploring that might make it funny and it might make it scary and it might make it moving or whatever. And the most interesting stories are stories that have drama to them. Yes. They have conflict. And the most interesting stories are stories that look at things in a new way. And so sometimes what we're looking at in a new way, let's say we're exploring the world of food and you make a movie like Big Night. You know, is that movie political? Well, it deals with immigration and stuff like that, but that's not the main thing about that movie. It's about the love of food. But there are a lot of issues. If you're dealing with someone who's poor, if you're dealing with someone who, you know, as Ryan asks, is someone who is, you know, transgender or something and telling their story, well, their story is going to be inherently political, because the position that they're in is related to their position in society. And so you cannot tell that story without to some degree being political. And I think that throughout history, particularly with comedy, by the way, art has been one of the main things that drives the moral story of the universe forward. It drives history. The most important example is probably Uncle Tom's Cabin, the most popular book for almost a century. And this book is, if you look at the pillars of what started the abolition movement, this is one of them. You know, this is one of the, Frederick Douglass, of course, John Brown, of course, but Uncle Tom, Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, that is art that changed history. We talked about Grapes of Wrath on this podcast. We talked about, you know, there's the book, The Jungle. You know, there's moments in history where a piece of art forces us to look at something in a different way. Does that mean I think that the job of the artist is to be political? Absolutely not. But that is one of the great things art can do. The other thing I think is that I think because of the nature of artists, because your job, whether you're an actor or a writer or director, is to put yourself into other people's shoes. That's what your job is. And because that's something that you practice doing all the time, how do I think from this other person's perspective? It naturally leads us to be, to some degree, more empathetic, to some degree, be more open about different perspectives. And that naturally leads us to want to tell those kinds of stories, you know?
Yeah. Agreed. And that's what you hope, that you tell the political story, but you leave the lesson. And most of the times, I'm saying 99% of the times, I feel like whenever there's an actual political or social issue highlighted in a film or in a TV show, it is to inform and instruct and possibly change things for the better in our current society. Even if it's a period piece, it's supposed to feel modern. You know, you watch Handmaid's Tale, and like it's set in essence in some otherworldly time, but it echoes powerfully through our current time now. And so that's the thing that's important if you're going to go the political route with any piece of art, is there has to be an end result to have an effect on the society one way or another.
Well, first of all, Handmaid's Tale is so good.
Yeah.
It's not one I relish watching. And
how can you relish that? Yeah, exactly. Right.
And I told Karen, like when we watch this, like I can only watch one episode a night.
Yeah.
I can't do two. It's so upsetting to me, but it's so beautifully made. But I'll go back to my first point. If Handmaid's Tale wasn't on some level entertaining, if you weren't involved with the characters and the stories, the politics doesn't matter. You know, like it's the very first job is you got to get my attention. And people that set out to, I am going to make a political film about this issue, that movie's probably doomed.
Yeah.
You know?
I feel that way about all those left-leaning films like The Contender and what was it? Oh, the Lambs for Lions, whatever that was. Those are films that are so blatantly one side of the political spectrum, and they vilify another side of the political spectrum that it does not allow for understanding. It allows only for judgment. And I bristle at stuff like that. You know, The American President, that's a lighter situation, but something like that, Lions for Lambs and the Contender, it is meant to vilify the other side politically. And I don't like that, in my opinion. I like a more balanced approach. And I bristle at stuff that it's too left-leaning or too right-leaning. I bristle at it.
Do you know the expressions straw man and steel man arguments?
Yeah.
So for those of you, so straw man this is the classic logical fallacy. A straw man argument is where John and I have an argument, and I will restate his position in the weakest possible way and then destroy it.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is a logical fallacy because I'm so proud of myself for destroying an argument when I set up. It wasn't how John would say it; it's how I just set up a really weak way to say it.
Right.
The opposite of that is called a steel man argument, which is that what in a really good argument, what I should do is articulate the best possible version of John's argument I can, one that he would go, yes, that I agree with, and then destroy it.
Yeah.
If I can destroy the Steelman argument, then I've really shown something. I think one of the examples that does this, and it's my favorite TV show of all time, is The West Wing. It is so good. Does The West Wing have a liberal bent? Absolutely. Is those my politics? Totally. And yet they will have a conservative come in and kick the shit out of the main characters in ways that you go, damn,
right.
I never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
I had a discussion once, I'm not, I'm a pro gun regulation person. I think there should be some regulations on firearms in this country. And I was having an argument with Hoover, who's come up many times on this show. And I said, because one of the arguments of the pro Second Amendment NRA is like, well, part of why we have our guns, and this was when Obama was president, is because if the government gets out of control, we need to be able to have a revolution just like in 1776.
Right.
And I said to Hoover, that's so ridiculous today, because how could a bunch of people with, AR-15s go up against tanks and bombers? And Hoover, who had spent 3 years embedded with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan during the war against the Soviets, said, "You've never been to Afghanistan." And I went, damn, because I was like, you know what? That was a thing I never thought about, is that in fact, my argument was not as nearly as strong as I thought it was. And that was really good. Because even if I don't necessarily agree with the point, it forces me to make my argument stronger.
Yep.
Ryan, that was a big question.
Yeah.
And we went into a lot of stuff. And I got to tell you, I love that question. It was challenging. It was difficult.
Yep.
John and I feel like we challenged each other to really think about some stuff. So I really, really appreciate it. And we like all of your suggestions. Please keep the Cine-Files Shorts suggestions coming. We really enjoy it. It gives John and I a chance to talk about some other stuff.
Sure.
And of course, we really appreciate all of your support on Patreon. It keeps the show going. And so on behalf of John and myself, I will say thank you, all of you, and we will see you next time for another Cine-Files Short.